Put it in the pit.
No!
Stand back, Omega. The ritual must continue. Begin burial.
Can't do
The
this!
pack has spoken.
The wind
My
over
king,
Blackfang Ridge
pups
did
have been
not
gathered.
whisper.
Good.
It roared.
The culling ritual
It
will
screamed
begin at
across
dawn.
the frozen mountain like a wild spirit that refused to be silenced. Snow blew through the air in sharp white spirals, cutting against stone walls and clawing at the roofs of the fortress that sat high above the valley. Blackfang Ridge was a cruel place. Winter ruled the land almost the entire year. The forests below were thick with ice-covered trees, and the mountain itself stood like a jagged crown of dark rock. Only the strongest creatures survived there. The weak rarely lasted long. The ridge belonged to the Stormfang pack. They were not known for mercy. Among the Stormfang wolves there was one rule that stood above all others. Only the strong deserved to live. Strength meant survival. Strength meant leadership. Strength meant respect. Anyone who could not fight, hunt, or protect the pack was seen as a burden. And burdens were not allowed to remain. This belief had ruled the Stormfang pack for generations. No one questioned it. At the center of that rule stood the most powerful wolf in the mountains, King Alaric Voss. Alaric was the alpha king of the Stormfang pack, and his name alone was enough to silence a room. He was a tall man with a broad chest and powerful shoulders built by years of battle and winter hunts. His dark beard was streaked with silver, and his sharp eyes glowed a pale gold that many said looked like the eyes of a wolf. Old scars crossed his face and arms like lines drawn by war. Each one told a story of survival. Alaric did not smile often. When he spoke, the entire pack listened. And when he gave an order, no one dared question it. On that cold morning, the entire Stormfang pack gathered in the ritual clearing near the edge of the fortress walls. The ground there had been cleared of snow. A shallow pit had been dug into the frozen earth. The wind howled around the circle of warriors and elders who stood watching in silence. Torches burned along the edges of the clearing, their flames bending in the violent wind. This was the place where the culling ritual took place. The ritual was simple. If a newborn pup was judged weak, sick, or cursed, it would be buried in the earth so the pack would not be slowed by weakness. The elders believed the goddess of the mountain demanded it. To refuse the ritual was to risk the survival of the entire pack. That morning, the ritual had been called for a single pup. Inside a woven basket near the pit lay a small wolf pup. His fur was white, not gray like the wolves of the Stormfang pack. Not brown like the wolves of the forest. Pure white like untouched snow. His name was Aurelian. But most of the pack did not call him that. They called him the Blind One. Aurelian had been born with eyes that were clouded and pale. They did not focus on light or movement. They did not react when someone waved a hand in front of his face. He could not see. To the Stormfang pack, blindness meant uselessness. The elders had already made their decision. Cursed, one of them had said the day he was born. Unfit to live, another had added. So the culling was announced. The warriors stood around the pit with arms folded, their faces hard and emotionless. To them this was nothing new. They had seen many rituals like this before. At the front of the circle stood King Alaric Voss. His wolf pelt cloak snapped in the wind as he looked down at the pit. His voice carried easily through the cold air. The goddess demands balance, he said. His words were calm and practiced. A pack is only as fast as its slowest member. The warriors nodded. To allow weakness to live, Alaric continued, is to invite hunger and death. Behind the warriors, near the edge of the gathering crowd, stood a young woman. Her name was Elira Vale. Elira was an Omega. In the Stormfang pack, Omegas were the lowest rank. They did not fight in battles. They did not lead hunts. Their duties were simple and quiet. They cooked food. They cleaned blood from armor. They repaired leather and carried water. And most of the time they stayed out of sight. Elira was small compared to the warriors around her. Her dark hair was tied back loosely, and a thin wool shawl hung around her shoulders to protect her from the cold. Her hands were rough from work. But at that moment they were shaking. Because Elira knew something no one else did. For 3 weeks she had hidden Aurelian. When the elders first ordered the pup to be killed, she had secretly taken him from the nursery and hidden him in the back of the stables. There, among the smell of hay and horses, she fed him tiny pieces of salted meat from her own rations. Just small bites. Just enough to keep him alive. She watched him grow stronger day by day, even though he could not see. He learned to find her voice. He learned to recognize her scent. When she entered the stable, his tiny nose would twitch and his tail would wag. But eventually the elders noticed the missing pup. And the ritual was scheduled. Now Elira stood frozen as 2 warriors stepped forward. They lifted the basket that held Aurelian. The small white pup made no sound as they carried him toward the pit. He could not see
Put
the
it in the
crowd.
pit.
He could only smell
Stand
the
back,
cold
Omega.
earth
The
and hear the
ritual
wind.
must continue.
The
Begin
basket
burial.
was
Can't do
lowered
this!
The pack
slowly
has
into the
spoken.
shallow grave. The moment the basket touched the ground, Alira's heart felt like it stopped. She stepped forward before she even realized what she was doing. "Please," she said. Her voice cracked in the cold air. The entire crowd turned. And Omega had spoken during the ritual. That alone was shocking. King Alaric turned slowly. His pale gold eyes locked onto her. "Please," Alira repeated, forcing the words out. "He's just a pup." The warriors began murmuring. "Let me take him away," she continued. "To the lowlands. He will never return. I swear it." Silence followed her words. Then Alaric gave a small, humorless smile. An Omega speaks during judgment. A few warriors laughed. "Go back to the hearth, girl," Alaric said. "If you want a pup so badly, find a mate." More laughter spread through the crowd. Alira didn't move. Her hands clenched into fists. "I have already kept him alive for 3 weeks." The laughter stopped instantly. The crowd murmured again. Alaric's eyes narrowed. "You stole pack resources?" Alira shook her head. "I used my own rations." Alaric turned away from her as if the conversation bored him. "This is what weakness does," he said to the crowd. "It makes people forget their place." He raised his hand. "Begin." An elder stepped forward with the first shovel of frozen dirt. The soil fell into the pit. It landed softly against Aurelian's white fur. Alira felt her knees weaken. Another shovel followed. Then another. The dirt slowly covered the basket. The white fur disappeared beneath dark earth. Soon the pit was filled completely. The warriors pushed a massive stone slab over the grave. The stone was carved with the ancient crest of the Stormfang pack. A wolf's head surrounded by thorns. The ritual was finished. King Alaric brushed dirt from his hands. "The feast begins in 1 hour," he announced. The pack began walking back toward the great hall. Soon the clearing was empty. Only the wind remained. And Alira. Snow had begun to fall. Soft white flakes drifted slowly through the air. They settled on the fresh grave. Alira walked forward slowly until she stood beside the stone. Then she knelt in the snow. Her hands touched the cold granite. Tears filled her eyes as the storm grew stronger. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I promised you the sun. The girl who dug through winter." The great hall of Blackfang Ridge was full of noise. Inside the massive stone building, the Stormfang pack gathered around long wooden tables. Firelight danced across the walls while roasted meat turned slowly over open flames. Warriors raised their mugs of ale and laughed loudly, celebrating another successful culling. To them, the ritual had been nothing more than duty. Another weak life removed. Another proof that the pack remained strong. But outside the fortress walls, the wind still howled across the mountain. Snow fell heavily, covering the ground in a thick white blanket. And beside the fresh grave near the ritual clearing, Alira Vale remained kneeling alone. She could still hear the laughter drifting from the great hall. The smell of roasted venison floated through the cold air. But Alira felt none of the warmth. Her eyes stayed fixed on the stone covering the grave. Beneath it, buried under frozen earth, was Aurelian. The small blind pup she had hidden and fed for 3 weeks. The pup who had trusted her voice. The pup she had promised the sun. Her chest tightened painfully. For a moment she considered doing nothing. Would be easier. The pack would never know. No one would blame her. But when she closed her eyes, she could still see the small basket lowering into the pit. She could still hear the dull sound of dirt falling against the pup's fur. Alira pushed herself to her feet. Her legs trembled from the cold. She stepped closer to the grave and placed both hands on the massive stone slab that sealed it. The stone was huge. 3 warriors had rolled it into place earlier that day. Its surface was rough and frozen, and the ancient crest of the Stormfang pack was carved deeply into the center. Alira pressed her shoulder against it and pushed. The stone did not move. She pushed harder, using all the strength in her small body. Still nothing. The stone might as well have been part of the mountain itself. Her breath came out in shaky clouds. For a moment she simply stood there, staring at the unmoving slab. Then slowly, another idea formed in her mind. She could not move the stone. She could go around it. Alira looked at the frozen earth beside the grave. The ground was solid with ice. Digging through it would be nearly impossible. But it was the only chance Aurelian had. She dropped to her knees beside the edge of the stone. Her fingers clawed at the frozen soil, but the ground was too hard. Her nails scraped uselessly against it. Frustration burned inside her chest. She forced herself to breathe. Then she looked around the clearing. Near the old well, half buried in the snow, she saw a jagged piece of dark rock. A shard of slate. Alira hurried toward it and grabbed it with both hands. The sharp edges cut into her palms, but she barely noticed. She returned to the grave and drove the slate into the frozen ground. The first strike barely chipped the surface. She struck again. And again. Each blow sent a shock of pain up her arms, but the ice slowly began to break. Small pieces of frozen dirt scattered across the snow. Alira kept digging. The wind screamed across the ridge. Snow piled on her shoulders and hair. Inside the great hall, the pack continued to feast. Outside, Alira worked in silence. Minutes turned into hours. Her hands began to ache. The sharp slate rubbed her skin raw, tearing open her palms and fingers. Blood seeped from the cuts and froze almost immediately in the cold air. But Alira did not stop. She struck the ground again and again, widening the narrow trench beside the stone. Her breathing grew heavier. Her arms felt weaker. The cold began creeping through her bones. Her fingers lost feeling. Then the numbness slowly turned into burning pain. Still she dug. Every time she thought about stopping, she remembered the small white pup lying helpless in the basket. She remembered the way his nose twitched whenever he heard her voice. She remembered the promise she had made. Hours passed. The shard of slate cracked down the middle from the force of her blows. Alira stared at it for a moment, then picked up the sharper half and continued digging. Her body shook violently now from exhaustion. Her clothes were soaked with melted snow. But slowly the ground beside the stone grew deeper. Then suddenly the slate struck something softer. The sound changed. Alira froze. Her heart began to pound. She dropped the broken slate and pushed the loose soil away with her bare hands. The earth beneath the stone was hollow. She dug faster now, tearing away chunks of dirt. Her fingers scraped against wicker. The basket. Alira widened the hole just enough to reach inside. Her hand slipped into the darkness beneath the stone. For a moment she felt nothing. Then her fingers touched something soft. Her breath caught in her throat. She carefully pulled the small body out through the gap. The white pup slid free slowly, covered in dirt and ice. Alira pulled him into her arms. He did not move. His small body hung limp. His mouth was slightly open. Aurelian looked completely still. "No," Alira whispered. Her voice trembled. "No, please." She brushed the dirt away from his nose and mouth. His chest did not rise. His tiny heart made no sound. For a moment panic froze her completely. Then instinct took over. Alira placed the pup carefully on the ground and leaned over him. She pressed her mouth gently over his snout and breathed into his lungs. Once, twice. Nothing happened. Tears filled her eyes. "Please," she whispered. She breathed again. Suddenly Aurelian's body twitched. A small cough escaped his throat. His chest rose sharply as air rushed into his lungs. His legs kicked weakly. Alira gasped. The pup's clouded white eyes opened slowly. His tiny nose twitched as he searched the air, searching for her scent. Alira let out a broken sob and pulled him close against her chest. "You're alive," she whispered. Relief flooded through her body so strongly her knees nearly gave out. But the relief lasted only a moment. Reality returned quickly. If King Alaric Voss discovered what she had done, the punishment would be brutal. Both of them would die. She looked back at the open hole beneath the stone. The grave was empty. If anyone inspected it, they would know immediately. She needed to hide the truth. Her mind raced. Then suddenly she remembered something. 2 days earlier, near the edge of the forest below the ridge, she had found a fox caught in an old trapper's snare. The animal had already been dead, frozen stiff by the cold. She had left it there. Now it might save them. Alira wrapped Aurelian inside her shawl and hurried down the snowy slope toward the forest. The wind bit at her face as she ran. Her legs were weak, but fear pushed her forward. The fox was still there. Its red fur was crusted with ice. Alira lifted the stiff body and carried it back toward the grave. When she returned to the clearing, she carefully unwrapped her family cloak, the one marked with the Vale crest. It was the only valuable thing she owned. She wrapped the fox tightly inside it. Then she lowered the bundle into the hole beside the stone. Working quickly, she filled the trench with dirt and packed the earth down. She smoothed the snow over the surface to hide any signs of digging. In the darkness and storm, it would look untouched. Hopefully no one would check. Finally she lifted Aurelian again. The pup whimpered softly against her chest. Alira held him close for warmth. "We're not safe yet," she whispered. She looked toward the dark mountain cliffs rising behind the fortress. Somewhere beneath those cliffs were tunnels that most of the pack refused to enter. They were called the Wailing Caverns. The wind that passed through them made strange mournful sounds that frightened even the bravest warriors. But fear made the caves perfect hiding places. Alira turned toward the mountain. Snow swirled around her as she began the long climb. Clutching the rescued pup against her chest, she disappeared into the storm. And toward the forbidden tunnels beneath Blackfang Ridge. The secret beneath the mountain. The tunnels beneath Blackfang Ridge were older than the fortress above them. Long before the Stormfang Pack built their stone halls and watchtowers, the mountain had already been hollowed by nature. Deep cracks and winding tunnels cut through the rock like veins running through the earth. The pack called them the Wailing Caverns. The name came from the wind. Cold mountain air pushed through the narrow passages, creating a long, mournful sound that echoed through the stone. The noise rose and fell like the cry of something lost. Many warriors believed the sound belonged to spirits. Some said the caves were haunted by wolves who had died in shame. Others claimed the mountain itself mourned for the weakness of those buried beneath its frozen soil. Because of those stories, most members of the Stormfang Pack avoided the caverns. No one wanted to walk through tunnels that sounded like the crying of the dead. That was exactly why Alira Vale had chosen them. She climbed through the narrow crack hidden behind a broken stone wall at the edge of the fortress courtyard. The opening was barely wide enough for her shoulders, and sharp rocks scraped against her clothes as she squeezed inside. Beyond the crack, the tunnel opened slowly. The wind sang through the stone passages, carrying that strange lonely sound through the darkness. Alira held Aurelian close against her chest as she walked deeper into the cavern. The small white pup was quiet now, pressed against the warmth of her body. His breathing was soft and steady. After several turns through the winding tunnels, the passage opened into a small hidden chamber. Alira had discovered it years ago while searching for an underground spring that supplied water to the fortress. The chamber was not large. It was about the size of a horse stall, with smooth stone walls and a dry floor. The wind could still be heard in the tunnels beyond, but inside the chamber the sound was softer, almost distant. Most importantly, no one ever came there. Alira knelt carefully and placed Aurelian on the ground. He shifted slightly, his nose twitching as he searched for her scent. "You're safe here," she whispered. The words felt strange in her mouth. Safe was not something the Stormfang Pack believed in. But she wanted it to be true. Alira looked around the small chamber and began preparing a place for the pup to rest. Weeks earlier, when she first feared the elders might discover Aurelian in the stables, she had secretly brought supplies into the caves. Now those supplies would keep him alive. She gathered dry moss that she had stored in a corner and spread it across the floor to create a soft bed. Then she laid several scraps of cloth over the moss to hold warmth. The simple nest was not beautiful, but it would protect him from the cold stone floor. Aurelian curled into the nest immediately, his small body shivering slightly. His fur was still damp from melted snow and dirt. Alira knelt beside him and gently wiped the mud from his coat using the edge of her dress. His clouded white eyes stared forward, unable to see her. But his nose twitched again. He recognized her scent. His tail moved weakly against the moss. Alira reached into the pocket inside her dress and pulled out a small piece of salted meat. She had hidden it there days earlier. Saving it. Waiting for the moment she might need it. She tore the meat into tiny pieces and held them near Aurelian's mouth. At first the pup struggled to chew. His small teeth were still weak. But slowly he began eating. Each bite seemed to give him more strength. When the meat was gone, he curled closer to her hand and rested his head against her fingers. Alira leaned back against the stone wall and closed her eyes. For the first time since the culling ritual, she allowed herself to breathe. But she knew this was only the beginning. Keeping Aurelian alive would require more food, more strength, more sacrifice. And winter had only just begun. Days turned into weeks. Every night after the fortress fell silent, Alira left the Omega quarters quietly and slipped through the hidden crack leading into the caverns. Each time she carried food. A crust of bread. A bowl of broth. Sometimes a small piece of meat taken from the kitchen scraps. She moved carefully, making sure no one saw her. The Stormfang Pack slept heavily after long hunts and heavy meals. Still, the risk was always there. If anyone discovered what she had done, the punishment would be severe. But Alira continued. Night after night. The small white pup began to grow. His legs became stronger. His fur thickened into a soft white coat that looked almost silver in the dim cave light. Although Aurelian could not see, he learned to move through the darkness in ways that surprised her. At first he stumbled often, bumping into walls and rocks. But slowly he began using his ears. The soft echo of his footsteps guided him. The scent of stone and moss helped him understand the space around him. Soon he could walk through the entire chamber without touching the walls. Sometimes he even ran through the tunnels beyond. Elira watched him with quiet amazement. "You're learning," she whispered one night as he moved easily from one rock to another. Aurelian tilted his head toward her voice. His tail wagged once. But while the pup grew stronger, Elira grew weaker. The food she carried to the caves always went to Aurelian first. She drank only a few sips of broth for herself. Most nights she went to bed hungry. Her clothes began hanging loosely on her body. Dark circles formed beneath her eyes. Still she continued. Because Aurelian needed her. One evening, while she stood in the kitchen receiving the nightly ration, an old woman studied her carefully. Her name was Mother Sela. She was the oldest cook in the fortress and had prepared meals for the pack for many years. Her sharp eyes missed very little. "You look thin," Sela said quietly as she ladled broth into Elira's bowl. "I'm fine," Elira replied. The old woman shook her head slowly. "You're not eating enough." Elira said nothing. Sela leaned closer and lowered her voice. "What are you hiding, girl?" Elira felt her heart beat faster. But she only bowed her head slightly. "Nothing." Sela studied her for another long moment. Then she sighed. From beneath her apron she pulled out a small wrapped bundle. Inside were pieces of dried fish and bread. She pressed the bundle into Elira's hands. "Take it." "I can't," Elira whispered. "You can," Sela replied firmly. "I've seen enough winters to know sacrifice when I see it." Elira's throat tightened. She wanted to explain everything. But she remained silent. "Thank you," she whispered instead. Sela nodded and turned back to the cooking pots. That night Elira carried the extra food to the caves. She placed it beside Aurelian's nest. The pup sniffed the air immediately and moved toward it. His movements were smoother now, more confident. Elira watched him eat slowly. When he finished, he licked her hand gently. The simple gesture filled her chest with warmth. But the hunger inside her stomach twisted painfully. She ignored it. Aurelian's survival mattered more. Months passed. Winter tightened its grip on Blackfang Ridge. Snow buried the mountain in deep white layers. Inside the caverns, Aurelian continued growing stronger. His hearing became incredibly sharp. Sometimes he reacted to sounds Elira could not hear at all. One evening, after she arrived in the chamber, she noticed something lying on the ground beside the nest. A rabbit. Freshly caught. Elira stared at it in surprise. Aurelian sat beside it proudly, his tail moving slowly. "You caught this?" she asked softly. The pup tilted his head toward her voice. His nose twitched happily. Elira picked up the rabbit. Her stomach growled loudly. She had not eaten real meat in weeks. Aurelian nudged the rabbit closer to her, as if offering it. Elira's hands trembled. She looked at the small wolf who had once depended entirely on her for survival. Now he was trying to help her. "We'll share it," she whispered. She prepared the meat carefully and divided it into 2 portions. For the first time in many months, Elira ate until the hunger inside her stomach stopped hurting. Aurelian lay beside her afterward, his head resting against her leg. The wind continued singing through the caverns. But inside the small chamber, something quiet and powerful had begun to grow. A bond. Stronger than fear. Stronger than hunger. Stronger than the cruel laws of the Stormfang pack. The Alpha's suspicion. Winter held Blackfang Ridge in a tight grip. Snow covered the stone walls of the fortress, and the cold wind never seemed to rest. The Stormfang pack continued their daily routines as they always had. Warriors trained in the courtyard. Hunters prepared for long journeys into the frozen forests below the mountain. Life continued as if nothing had changed. But for Elira Vale, every day had become a battle. Weeks of hunger had slowly drained her strength. Her body had grown thin, and her face looked pale and tired. She moved more slowly than before, and sometimes the world seemed to spin when she stood too quickly. Still, she continued her secret. Every night she carried food to Aurelian in the hidden chamber of the Wailing Caverns. Every night she returned before dawn, hoping no one would notice. For a while no one did. Until the morning everything nearly fell apart. The fortress courtyard was busy with activity. Warriors moved across the stone ground carrying weapons and supplies. The sound of clashing steel echoed as 2 fighters practiced with training swords. Elira walked carefully through the courtyard carrying a bundle of firewood. The load was heavier than usual. She had taken the task from another Omega because she needed an excuse to move freely across the fortress. But her body was too weak. Halfway across the courtyard, her legs began to tremble. The weight of the firewood pulled her forward. Her vision blurred. Dark spots filled her sight. Alira tried to steady herself, but the strength left her arms. The bundle of wood slipped from her grasp and scattered across the stone. A moment later she collapsed. The cold ground struck her shoulder and knocked the breath from her lungs. The noise drew attention immediately. Several warriors turned toward her. Heavy footsteps crossed the courtyard. A large shadow fell over her. Strong hands gripped her shoulders and lifted her from the ground. Alira blinked as her vision cleared. Standing in front of her was King Alaric Voss. The Alpha King had been walking toward the armory when she fell. Now he held her upright easily as if she weighed nothing. His pale gold eyes studied her face carefully. "Montgomery," he said in a low voice. The name slipped from his mouth out of habit. Most Omegas were known only by family names. But Alira barely noticed. Her heart pounded nervously. Alaric's eyes moved slowly across her thin face and hollow cheeks. "When did you last eat?" The question caught her off guard. "This morning," Alira answered quickly. The lie came easily. Alaric's expression did not change. "Liar." The word was quiet but firm. His grip tightened slightly around her arms. "You are skin and bone," he continued. "I can feel every rib through your clothes." Alira looked away. "I'm fine." "No, you are not." For a moment there was something different in his voice. Not anger. Something closer to concern. "The winter is hard on everyone," Alaric said. "But you look like you're starving." Alira forced herself to stay calm. "I've been fasting." Alaric frowned. "Fasting?" "For the goddess?" Alira replied softly. "For clarity." The Alpha studied her face again. The explanation sounded strange even to his own ears. But he did not challenge it immediately. Instead he tilted his head slightly. His nose lifted toward the air. Werewolves possessed senses far stronger than ordinary humans. They could detect the smallest change in scent. Fear. Illness. Deception. At that moment Alaric was trying to understand why Alira's condition felt wrong. His nostrils flared as he breathed in slowly. Something unfamiliar lingered in the air around her. A scent that should not exist. He stepped closer. His face moved near her shoulder. Alira felt panic surge through her chest. "What is that?" Alaric asked quietly. "What?" she replied quickly. "That scent." His eyes narrowed. "It's faint." He breathed in again. "Old, but not old." His expression slowly changed. "Familiar." Alira's pulse hammered in her ears. The scent of Aurelian clung to her clothes. Even though she washed in the underground spring before returning to the fortress, some traces remained. Alaric could smell them. His body went still. "Impossible," he muttered. The word was barely audible. Alira forced herself to remain calm. "Alpha?" Alaric stepped back suddenly. The strange scent confused him. It reminded him of the pup buried months earlier. But that could not be true. He had sealed the grave himself. "You're dismissed," he said abruptly. His voice had returned to its cold authority. "Go to your quarters and eat. That is an order." Alira nodded quickly. She gathered the scattered firewood and hurried away as fast as her weak legs allowed. She could feel his gaze following her across the courtyard. But she did not look back. She did not go to her quarters. Instead, she moved quietly toward the hidden crack in the fortress wall. Her heart pounded as she slipped inside and began descending into the Wailing Caverns. Behind her, Alaric Voss remained standing in the courtyard. The strange sense still lingered in his thoughts. After a moment he turned slowly toward the old well. Something about the smell bothered him. It reminded him too strongly of the ritual. Of the blind pup. Of the grave. His instincts told him something was wrong. And Alaric had learned long ago to trust his instincts. He walked across the courtyard toward the cracked stone wall. The opening was small and easy to overlook. But now the faint scent reached him again. It drifted from the darkness beyond the crack. Alaric crouched and stepped inside. The tunnels of the Wailing Caverns stretched deep beneath the mountain. Cold wind rushed through the narrow passages, creating the strange crying sound that frightened many members of the pack. But Alaric did not fear stories about ghosts. He moved through the tunnels silently. The scent grew stronger. He followed it deeper into the caverns. The passages twisted through the stone like a maze. But eventually he reached a small chamber hidden far beneath the mountain. Light from a small oil lamp flickered against the walls. And there inside the chamber stood Alira Vale. Beside her was a wolf. White fur covered its growing body. Clouded eyes stared into the darkness. The blind pup. Aurelian. For a moment Alaric could not move. Shock held him in place. He stared at the wolf as if the creature were a ghost risen from the grave, You, he said slowly. His voice echoed through the chamber. Alira turned toward him. Fear filled her face. You dug him out, Alaric whispered. The realization struck him like lightning. He remembered the stone, the frozen earth, the sealed grave. 3 warriors had struggled to move that stone. Yet somehow this small Omega had saved the pup. You actually dug him out. Alira lifted her chin. Yes. Alaric looked at her hands. Faint white scars crossed her palms and fingers. Marks left by torn skin and healed wounds. Understanding settled heavily over him. You didn't move the stone, he said quietly. Alira met his eyes. I went through the earth. Silence filled the chamber. Alaric looked back at Aurelian. He should be dead. He isn't. The Alpha stepped closer. The white wolf remained still. Though blind, the pup sensed the presence approaching him. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Then suddenly Aurelian lifted his head. His mouth opened. And from deep inside his chest came a sound that shook the entire cavern. A powerful supernatural howl echoed through the tunnels beneath Blackfang Ridge. The prophecy of the blind king. The howl rolled through the wailing caverns like thunder trapped inside stone. The sound echoed down every tunnel beneath Blackfang Ridge, shaking dust from the ceiling and sending loose pebbles tumbling across the floor. The mournful wind that usually filled the caverns was swallowed by that single voice. It was not the cry of a frightened animal. It was something deeper. Something powerful. The sound vibrated through Alira Vale's chest and bones. She felt it like a pulse inside her body. Across the chamber, King Alaric Voss froze where he stood. The Alpha had heard thousands of wolves howl before. It was the most natural sound in the world for his kind. But this was different. This howl carried weight. Authority. For a brief moment, the air inside the chamber seemed to grow colder. Then the sound faded. Silence returned slowly. Aurelian stood in the center of the chamber, his white fur glowing faintly in the dim lamplight. His clouded eyes stared into darkness, unable to see anything around him. But his ears were alert. His nose twitched slightly as he listened and smelled the world around him. Alaric took a slow step forward. His heart was beating harder than he wanted to admit. What was that? He muttered quietly. Alira did not answer. She remained standing protectively near the wolf. Alaric's attention returned to Aurelian. The Alpha crouched slowly, lowering himself until he was almost eye level with the growing pup. His movements were careful, controlled. Aurelian responded immediately. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Despite his blindness, the pup could sense the powerful presence near him. Alaric studied him closely. The white fur. The unusual calmness. The strange howl that still echoed in his memory. Something about the animal felt wrong. Or perhaps not wrong. Different. He reached out slowly and brushed his fingers through the fur on Aurelian's chest. The wolf shifted slightly but did not attack. Then Alaric saw it. At first he thought it was just a shadow in the fur. But when he pushed the thick white hair aside, the mark became clear. A dark shape stood out against the pale coat. It was not dirt. It was not a scar. It was a birthmark. The shape looked like a crown. But the crown was cracked. 3 points stretched upward while a jagged line cut across the center, as if the crown had once been broken and rebuilt. Alaric's breath caught. His hand froze. No, he whispered. The word slipped from him before he could stop it. Alira watched his expression carefully. What is it? She asked. Alaric did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the mark. Memories stirred inside his mind. Stories from long ago. Legends told by the oldest members of the pack. Stories most warriors dismissed as old myths meant to frighten children. Slowly he stood. The broken crown, he said quietly. Alira frowned. I don't understand. Alaric looked down at the wolf again. His voice sounded distant. There is an old prophecy. Alira waited. The prophecy speaks of a king who will be born during the darkest age of the pack. His gaze lifted toward the cavern ceiling. A king who cannot see the world with his eyes. Alira's heart began to beat faster. A blind king? Alaric nodded slowly. The blind seer king. The words echoed through the small chamber. Alira looked back at Aurelian. The wolf stood quietly beside her, unaware of the weight those words carried. What does the prophecy say? She asked. Alaric's expression darkened. It says the packs will become violent and blind with power. His voice grew quieter. And when that happens, the goddess will send a king who sees with truth instead of sight. Alira felt a strange chill pass through her body. And that king restores balance. Alaric's eyes returned to the birthmark. The broken crown is his sign. The realization settled heavily in the chamber. The blind pup. The strange howl. The mark hidden in his fur. Aurelian. Alira's voice trembled slightly. You're saying he is the king from the prophecy. Alaric did not answer right away. But the silence itself was an answer. Then slowly his expression changed. Another thought had entered his mind. A darker one. The elders, he said quietly. Alira blinked. What about them? Alaric's jaw tightened. They knew. Alira stared at him. What? The elders are the keepers of our history, Alaric continued. They know every prophecy, every legend. His eyes hardened. They would recognize this mark immediately. Understanding slowly spread across Alira's face. You think they tried to kill him? Alaric's expression grew grim. Yes. The Alpha turned away and paced slowly across the chamber. His boots scraped against the stone floor. If the prophecy is real, he said, the blind seer king would change everything. Alira watched him. What do you mean? The Stormfang pack is ruled by strength. His voice carried frustration now. The strongest warrior becomes Alpha. Alira nodded slowly. That is the law. But a seer king would rule through wisdom. Alaric stopped pacing. That would weaken the power of the elders. His eyes narrowed. And the warriors who control the pack. The truth settled over them both. The culling had not been about weakness. It had been about power. Alira looked down at Aurelian again. The small wolf wagged his tail gently as if unaware of the danger surrounding him. Alaric exhaled slowly. I almost killed him. The word sounded heavy. Guilt crept into his voice. He had stood in that clearing and ordered the pup buried alive. He had sealed the grave himself. If Alira had not intervened, the prophecy would have ended beneath the frozen earth. Alaric looked at Alira. You saved him. She said nothing. The Alpha made his decision quickly. We cannot leave him here. Alira stiffened. What? If the elders discover this, they will finish what they started. Alaric stepped toward the tunnel entrance. I know a place inside the fortress where they will not look. Alira hesitated. But she understood the danger. Together they left the caverns and returned to the fortress under the cover of night. Alaric led them through quiet hallways and up a narrow spiral staircase inside one of the oldest towers. At the top waited a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron. Alaric pushed it open. Inside the room was warm. A fire burned in a stone hearth. A real bed sat against the far wall. A wooden table held food and water. More food than Alira had seen in weeks. Stay here, Alaric said. Alira stepped inside slowly with Aurelian beside her. The wolf sniffed the air curiously. Alaric moved back toward the door. This room is safe, he continued. No one comes here without my permission. Then he stepped outside. Before Alira could react, the heavy door closed. A loud click echoed through the room. The sound of a lock turning. Alira ran toward the door and pulled the handle. It did not move. Her heart sank. Alaric's voice came from the other side. It is for your protection. His footsteps moved away down the staircase. Alira stood silently in the quiet room. Behind her, Aurelian wandered across the floor, exploring the unfamiliar space. The warm firelight flickered against the walls. The food on the table filled the air with tempting smells. But Alira did not move toward it. Instead she looked slowly around the room. It was comfortable, warm, protected. But the door remained locked. She exhaled quietly. We escaped one prison, she whispered. Aurelian turned toward the sound of her voice. His tail wagged gently. Alira stared at the door. And walked into another. The betrayal of blood. The tower chamber was silent. A fire crackled softly in the hearth, filling the room with warmth that felt strange after months of cold caves and frozen nights. Outside the thick stone walls of the fortress, the wind howled across Blackfang Ridge, carrying snow through the mountain passes. Inside the tower room, Alira Vale sat quietly beside the small table. Aurelian rested near the fire. The white wolf had grown stronger in the past weeks. His fur was thicker, his body larger, and his movements more confident. Even though his eyes could not see, he moved through the room easily by listening to sound and sensing the air around him. Alira watched him carefully. She still did not trust the tower. The room was warm. There was food. There was safety. But the heavy iron door remained locked. And she could not forget that the Alpha King had placed them here. Aurelian lifted his head suddenly. His ears twitched. Alira noticed immediately. What is it? She whispered. The wolf stood. He turned his head toward the door. His body stiffened. Then Alira heard it. Footsteps. Many footsteps. Boots climbing the spiral staircase outside. Heavy. Fast. The sound of metal armor clinking echoed through the stone tower. Alira's heart began to pound. Someone was coming. And there were many of them. The footsteps stopped outside the door. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then, bang. The door shook violently as something slammed against it. Alira jumped. Another strike followed. Bang. The iron hinges groaned. Aurelian growled low in his throat. Bang. The third strike burst the door open. The wood cracked as the heavy lock snapped apart. The door flew inward. Cold air rushed into the warm room. Several armed warriors stormed inside. Their armor carried the symbol of the Stormfang pack. Behind them stood a tall man with dark hair and a sharp face that looked strangely familiar. Alira had seen him before. At pack gatherings. At ceremonies. It was Darius Voss, the younger brother of King Alaric. Darius stepped calmly into the room as the warriors spread out around him. His cold eyes scanned the chamber. They landed first on Alira, then on the white wolf beside her. A slow smile formed on his lips. "Well," he said quietly. "So the rumors were true." Alira stepped protectively in front of Aurelian. "What do you want?" Darius ignored the question. Instead he walked slowly around the room, studying everything. The alpha hides a servant girl and a cursed pup in a locked tower. His tone carried quiet amusement. Interesting choice for a king. Alira's stomach twisted. "What did you do to Alaric?" she asked. Darius stopped walking. He looked at her with calm satisfaction. "My brother has been detained." Alira felt fear rise inside her. "You arrested the king?" Darius shrugged. "The throne belongs to the strongest wolf." He looked toward the warriors behind him. "And tonight the pack will see that strength." Alira understood immediately. This was not a visit. It was a coup. Darius had gathered loyal warriors and taken control of the fortress. He turned back toward Aurelian. "So this is the creature that made my brother lose his mind." The wolf growled again. Even without sight, Aurelian could feel the danger in the room. Darius crouched slightly and studied him. "A blind pup." His voice carried disgust. "And yet my brother hides him like treasure." Alira tightened her fists. "You don't understand." Darius laughed softly. "Oh, I understand perfectly." His eyes hardened. "This creature threatens the throne." He straightened. Then he spoke to the warriors. "Kill it." The order fell into the room like a blade. The warriors stepped forward. Steel swords slid from their sheaths. Alira moved quickly. She stepped between them and the wolf. "No," she shouted. But the warriors did not stop. They raised their weapons. Aurelian stepped forward slowly. The white wolf's ears twitched. He could hear every heartbeat in the room. Every breath. Every movement. The warriors closed in. Then, Aurelian lifted his head. A deep sound rolled from his chest. But it was not a growl. It was a command. A powerful wave of sound exploded through the room. The force of it slammed into the warriors like invisible thunder. "Stop." The word was not spoken like normal speech. It was something older. Something deeper. The air itself seemed to carry the command. And every warrior froze. Swords hung in the air. Feet stopped moving. Even Darius stiffened where he stood. Shock spread across his face. The warriors' bodies refused to move. Their muscles trembled as if an unseen force held them in place. No one could step forward. No one could attack. Aurelian stood calmly in the center of the room. His blind eyes stared forward. The command hung in the air like iron chains. Darius tried to move. His jaw clenched. But his body refused to obey. "What is this?" he whispered. The silence that followed was broken by another voice. An old voice. "You are witnessing the power you tried to destroy." Everyone turned. A shadow moved near the doorway. An elderly wolf stepped into the room. His long gray hair hung over dark robes marked with ancient symbols. It was Elder Selim, one of the oldest members of the Stormfang pack. Alira recognized him from pack ceremonies. But she had never seen him inside the fortress alone before. Darius glared at him. "What are you doing here?" Selim ignored the question. Instead he looked calmly at Aurelian. Then he sighed deeply. "The prophecy has awakened." Alira stared at him. "You knew about this?" The old elder nodded slowly. "Yes." His tired eyes turned toward the warriors. "For generations the elders have protected the throne." Darius struggled against the invisible command. "What does that mean?" Selim's voice remained calm. "It means we have kept the prophecy from coming true." Alira's heart dropped. "What did you do?" The old man did not hesitate. "We eliminated every prophetic child." Silence filled the room. The words echoed against the stone walls. Elira stared at him in horror. "How many?" she whispered. Selim's voice was quiet. 7. The number struck the room like thunder. 7 pups. 7 blind kings. All murdered before they could grow. The warriors' faces twisted with shock. Even Darius looked stunned. "You killed them?" one warrior whispered. Selim nodded. The prophecy threatened the power of the elders. His voice remained steady. "So we ensured it would never happen." Anger spread through the room like fire. The warriors began to murmur. "You lied to the pack. You told us the pups were cursed. You used the culling ritual." Their voices grew louder. Rage began to rise. The truth had broken something inside them. For centuries the Stormfang pack had believed they were protecting strength. Now they realized they had been manipulated. Used. Controlled. Darius finally managed to move his fingers slightly. His voice shook with fury. "You controlled everything." Selim did not deny it. "Yes." Chaos erupted. The warriors turned on the elder. Some shouted. Some raised their weapons. Others looked around the room in disbelief. The pack's entire history suddenly felt like a lie. In the middle of the storm of voices, Aurelian remained calm. The blind wolf sat quietly beside Elira. His tail curled around his paws. The command that held the warriors slowly faded. But none of them attacked again. The truth had already shattered the room. Elira looked down at the wolf beside her. He sat peacefully while the fortress filled with anger and confusion. Outside the tower walls, the news of the elder's confession began spreading through the fortress. The pack would soon learn everything. And nothing in Blackfang Ridge would ever be the same again. The king who could not see. The tower of Blackfang Ridge was no longer quiet. Voices echoed through the spiral staircases and stone halls as warriors rushed through the fortress carrying news of what had happened inside the tower chamber. The confession of Elder Selim spread quickly from mouth to mouth. The Stormfang pack had believed for generations that their strength protected them. Now they learned the truth. The elders had been killing the children marked by prophecy. 7 blind pups had been buried before they could grow. The revelation shook the entire fortress. Warriors gathered in the courtyard in restless groups. Some argued loudly. Others stood in stunned silence as they tried to understand how long the deception had lasted. But one truth had become impossible to ignore. The 8th marked child was alive. And he was inside the tower. Not long after the chaos began, a group of warriors pushed their way through the tower doors carrying someone between them. Their prisoner was King Alaric Voss. His wrists had been bound earlier during Darius Voss's attempted coup. The rope around his arms hung loosely now as the warriors untied him. The moment his hands were free, Alaric stood tall again. He looked tired, but his posture still carried the strength of a king. The warriors led him up the tower staircase toward the chamber where everything had begun. When the door opened, Alaric stepped inside. The room was filled with tension. Warriors crowded along the walls. Darius stood near the doorway, his earlier confidence gone. Elder Selim remained under guard. And in the center of the room stood Elira Vale beside the white wolf. Aurelian. Alaric's eyes found them immediately. For a moment he said nothing. He simply walked forward slowly until he stood before the small wolf. Then he turned to face the gathered pack. "I need to speak," he said. The room fell silent. Even the restless murmuring from the warriors stopped. Alaric looked at every face in the chamber before continuing. 3 months ago, he began, a blind pup was born within this pack. Several warriors shifted uncomfortably. I gave the order to bury that pup alive. His voice did not waver. I watched as the grave was filled. A heavy silence settled over the room. Alaric continued. I sealed the stone with my own hands. His golden eyes moved toward Elira. And while the earth covered that child, I walked into the great hall and celebrated. A few warriors lowered their heads. They had been there that night. They had eaten and laughed while the grave was fresh. Alaric's voice grew quieter. This woman refused to accept that order. He gestured toward Elira. She dug through frozen earth with her bare hands. Elira felt dozens of eyes turn toward her. She tore open the ground and pulled the pup from death itself. Alaric paused, while the rest of us feasted. His confession filled the room with shame. Then the Alpha King did something no one expected. Slowly he lifted the iron crown from his head. The crown of the Stormfang pack had been worn by every Alpha ruler of Blackfang Ridge for centuries. It was heavy and simple, forged from black iron. A symbol of authority. A symbol of strength. Alaric held the crown in both hands. Then he knelt. The movement shocked the room. The Alpha King of the Stormfang pack lowered himself onto one knee before the blind wolf. Gasps spread through the gathered warriors. Alaric placed the crown gently on the floor between them. "I am not worthy to wear this crown," he said quietly. His head bowed slightly. "I followed a law that demanded strength without mercy." His eyes lifted toward Aurelian. "And that law almost destroyed our future." The room held its breath. For a moment nothing happened. Then the small white wolf moved. Aurelian stepped forward. His paws made almost no sound on the stone floor. He stopped in front of Alaric. The blind wolf raised his head. And then for the first time he spoke. The voice that came from him was calm and clear. It carried the strange echo of something ancient. "You are not unworthy," Aurelian said. The words spread through the chamber like a ripple across still water. The warriors stared in disbelief. The wolf continued. "You were blind." His clouded eyes turned slightly toward the gathered pack. "But blindness is not the same as evil." The room remained silent. Alaric looked up slowly. "You made a mistake," Aurelian continued. "But you are learning." The wolf stepped forward and placed one paw gently against Alaric's chest. The gesture was both simple and powerful. "A king is not measured by perfection." His voice remained calm. "A king is measured by the courage to change." The tension inside the chamber softened slightly. Aurelian turned toward the warriors. For generations the Stormfang pack believed that strength alone created power. His voice echoed softly against the walls. "But strength without sacrifice becomes cruelty." The warriors listened closely. "And power without compassion becomes tyranny." Aurelian's words carried weight beyond his young age. From that moment forward, the future of the pack began to change. The blind wolf lifted his head proudly. "From this day forward," he declared, "the law of this pack will be different." The warriors waited. "Sacrifice is strength." His voice grew firmer. "Compassion is power." The words spread through the room like fire catching dry wood. Something old had ended. Something new had begun. Aurelian then turned toward Elira. The young woman stood quietly beside him, her hands still scarred from the night she had dug through frozen earth. "This woman saved my life when she had nothing," the wolf said. "She fed me while she was starving." He paused. "She protected me when the world wanted me dead." Elira felt tears rise in her eyes. "She is no longer an Omega." Aurelian's voice carried through the chamber. "She is the guardian of the ridge." The declaration stunned the pack. For the first time in Stormfang history, an Omega had been lifted above every other rank. Elira could barely move. Aurelian stepped closer to her. "Place the crown," he said gently. Her hands trembled as she picked up the iron circlet. The metal felt cold and heavy. Slowly she lowered it onto Aurelian's head. The crown rested against his white fur as if it had always belonged there. A quiet stillness filled the room. Then one warrior dropped to one knee. Another followed. Soon the entire chamber knelt. Even Darius lowered his head. The Stormfang pack had accepted their new king. In the weeks that followed, the grave where Aurelian had been buried was left untouched. The heavy stone remained. But the ground around it was cleared. The place became a memorial. A reminder of the night when truth was almost lost beneath frozen earth. When spring finally returned to the mountain, small white flowers began growing beside the stone. No one planted them. But every year they returned. Time passed. The Stormfang pack changed. Elira became the most trusted advisor in the kingdom. Warriors came to her for guidance. Leaders sought her wisdom. And the woman who had once been invisible became the heart of the pack. King Alaric kept his promise. He no longer ruled. Instead he served as the protector of the blind king. His strength guarded the mountain while Aurelian guided the future. Many years later, when Elira Vale was 83 years old, her long life finally came to an end. She passed peacefully. The pack buried her beside the memorial stone. Beside the grave she had once dug with bleeding hands. King Aurelian remained there for 3 days and 3 nights. When the final night came, the blind king lifted his head to the sky. And he howled. The sound carried across the mountains and valleys. Not with anger. Not with pain. But with love. The wind moved gently through the peaks of Blackfang Ridge. Once it had screamed like a storm. Now it carried something softer. The song. The mountain remembered the girl who had dug through winter. And the king who had learned to see without eyes. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more interesting stories.